The other day, a friend of mine who is a director of a pageant over in New Zealand, maybe not director, but certainly on the board, maybe she's not the director, she asked for my advice. And so that you know, without disclosing personal information, New Zealand has to choose a representative or hold a competition to choose a representative for New Zealand, obviously, to compete at this international pageant. Now, why she needed my advice was because basically the international director wrote back to her and in not so many words said, this girl isn't white enough. She looks too Asian, basically. And he said, if you don't like it, well, that's just the way that, pageants are. And if you don't like it, well, then that's tough. Like next time you hold a pageant, I'll send an American representative who's Chinese. And I was just like, I'm so sick of hearing this nonsense and BS from wannabe pageant dictators. And I want to put this across as an open letter to all pageant directors out there who actually give a damn about honesty and integrity. And I want to hear your thoughts, because situations ongoing like this to me are completely unacceptable. But there seems to be so few regulations or even expectations of conduct from directors or pageant staff in general. And I hear so many stories on an ongoing basis as to certain people behaving in completely despicable, untenable ways. And because I respect privacy and because I don't want to instigate some sort of giant, storm on social media, although I am erring more that way as time goes on, I have to be in this really unenviable position of pretending that I don't know when someone asks me, oh, what do you think of this pageant? Or, hey, I'm competing in this pageant and, can you interview me? And I'm just like, oh, why did you enter that pageant? And by that time, it's too late. If they ask me beforehand, I may give them my honest thoughts if they want them. It's not my job to say, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. But, when they've entered, it's too late, and then they're so excited, and I'm just like, oh God, why me? And you want me to interview you? So I want to interview you, but I want to give no publicity to your system whatsoever. And I've been giving some thought this morning as to perhaps what could be done to ensure the safety and well-being of our contestants. Now, I'm only speaking here to directors who actually give a damn. If you are, and I believe there are two types of director, largely speaking. There are ones who look at it as a position of service, and there are other ones who look at it as a position of dictatorship or ego. Now, of course, there are gray areas, and I'm not saying it has to be one way or the other. And by the way, if you want to run your pageant for profit, or you want to make sure your pageant makes money and can pay for itself, more power to you. I completely agree with that. As someone who owns his own business, I'm not asking you to do this for free. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying from a moral and ethical position, do you look at your directorship as a position where you get to tell everyone what to do? Or do you look at it from a position of, this is my chance, opportunity to help these young women grow? Because that's certainly how I look at it. Now, if you belong to that latter group, great. So here's my proposition for you. Three parts. To best as we can as an industry safeguard the well-being of our contestants. Number one, here are three suggestions. Hear me out and then let me know your thoughts. Number one, transparency in scoring. Now, I've said this on multiple occasions. You look at any sport, any competitive sport that I can think of, people know the rules beforehand, they know the scoring, and the scores are out there for everyone to see. Example, you play tennis, you know the rules. The ball's got to land in a certain place at a certain time, and the results are published publicly. Like if you lost 6-love, 6-love, it's put up there. It's not like, oh my God, I'm not going to publish it because it will hurt your feelings, so we'll just say that the other person won. No. And I have to say that the overwhelming majority of women that I've spoken to who've competed in pageants, who, let's say, well, actually, I can't think of any exceptions. Everyone who I've spoken to in general has been in favor of greater transparency in pageant scoring. But here's why I'm saying this. and I'm putting this across to you as a director, if you are willing to have transparency in your scoring, and of course there's a discussion we could have about the degree of transparency, but if you have transparency in scoring, it limits the potential of any backdoor dealings, backroom dealings, right? So when there's these accusations of, oh, she only won because she was this judge's favorite, etc., etc., if you put out the scores, you're transparent about the scores, what they were, maybe which judge gave which scores, and you're also transparent upfront as to what the criteria are. So what percentage is, for example, on stage, what percentage is on interview. I feel the more transparent you are, the less chance there is of something going wrong. Because, for example, when someone has a position of power, let's say you have no transparency in your scoring and there's a dodgy director out there, let's say he's a man and he's looking at these young women and he decides, oh, I want this one, I want that one. The chance to say, well, if you want to win, then you got to do what I say, it's exacerbated way too high. If you have complete transparency in scoring, and there needs to be a conversation as to how you could ensure this, but if you have transparency in scoring, you kind of obliterate or take away that power, that possibility of something going wrong. Now, it doesn't guarantee it, but in my mind, not only does transparency in scoring help your contestants know, this is what I need to work on. Oh, I did well here, I didn't do well here. Not only that, but it really lessens the possibility of something going wrong in that sort of power dynamic sense of, if you want to win, you better do as I say, or, if you want to win, come to my hotel room, that sort of thing. And we've seen that happen in the biggest pageants in the world, allegedly. And so, that's proposition number one. Increased transparency in scoring, and that's my reason why. It lessens the possibility of that power dynamic being abused, power dynamic between director, let's say maybe even judges, and the contestants. Number two, you guys have, as directors, probably winners contracts, right? Or maybe first runner-up contracts as well, or royal court or an elemental court contract. I would like to see those contracts made available to all your contestants before the competition, so those who want to have the chance to have them reviewed. And there may be some privacy, confidential thing that I'm not aware of that prohibits that, but I really, really, really dislike the idea of a young woman being told she needs to sign the contract on the day after the pageant, and she doesn't have a chance to have that professionally reviewed by someone who has legal expertise. You're talking about putting a binding contract on someone and they haven't had time to review it. Now, this is just from what I've seen, I don't think that happens to a large extent. Maybe it does, and if it does, great, tell me I'm wrong. But the idea of a young woman being forced basically to sign a contract the day after she's won, she's probably sleep deprived, tired, probably doesn't have legal expertise in most cases, and being told she needs to sign that, or, we're giving your position to someone else. From my knowledge of legal matters, as limited as it is, isn't that signing under duress? And then that invalidates the contract. And again, the reason I want that up front is so that we know exactly what's expected from the winner. And it should be stated, such as things like appearances, what appearances are expected, social media, what posts are expected, conduct, of course, that's a bit harder to explicitly state. How do you state good conduct? But that should be in there as well. The amount of money, what's being paid for, what's not being paid for, at what time, how it will be paid, that should all be stipulated. And I'm not just saying this as some flippant remark. I, again, in the unenviable position of a friend of mine who was an international queen for a system, and she was having massive problems with the director. And she sent me the contract because she was saying, hey, do you think this contract sounds right? And I read it with horror. Not only was it very badly worded and spelt, it looked like someone who was trying, trying to sound intelligent and knew about legal matters when they really didn't. They probably should have used ChatGPT, would have done a better job. But they were basically claiming talent agency rights over everything this girl did, even not excluding the work that she had set up before the pageant. They were somewhere in the field of, I think, 25 to 40%, I don't remember the exact number, 25 to 40% of all the monies she earned, just from everything. There was no exclusionary label, and they're saying even like, oh, well, your work, no, we don't take money from your work. If I had taken the word of that contract as law, everything this girl earned in the next year would have 25 to 40% would have had to go to them, without exception. If you'd bought Bitcoin or stocks or shares or something, you'd have to give 40% to them. Now, of course, the person who wrote it probably wasn't intelligent enough to understand this, and therefore couldn't enforce it, and probably didn't even mean it, if I'm honest. But a blanket 25 to 40% without limitations over the next year, not even excluding the work that you had set up with your own contacts before, again, those contracts should be legally binding, unless I'm missing something. So I think it behooves people to have the time to review the contracts. And that also gives the contestants a chance to go, actually, I'm not willing to sign that contract, and so I'm going to withdraw. I think they should have that option. And I don't think that most girls have the capability of reviewing a legally binding document the day after they win a pageant, right? Or 2 days after they win a pageant. So that's my suggestion number 2. Give the girls a chance to review those contracts more than, here, you've won, sit down this morning, and now you have to sign it. Sorry for the dog barking in the background. It's a crazy weekend. So number 1, transparency in scoring, greater transparency. Number 2, giving the girls a chance to review these legal documents, preferably girls, I would say, with someone who knows the legal area, and not just your parents, and not just your best friend, and not just yourself. The third area I would like to suggest is some sort of external, objective third party to help deliberate in contentious matters. Now, what I mean by this is, if you know, for example, the Hague court, the criminal court, which rules in cases of crimes against humanity, war criminals, and there are certain countries that have signed up to agree to abide by the rulings of this international court. There are many countries, including the US, as I understand, who have not agreed to abide by it. But it's this sort of international court that arbitrates in matters of crimes against humanity, war criminals, etc. I would like to suggest that maybe there should be some sort of external, objective third party in pageantry that directors or contestants can bring matters to get something approximating an objective arbitration without necessarily having to go to court. Now, I say this because going to court and lawyer fees are incredibly expensive in any country. And sometimes it's not really a case of legal law. Like some contentious issue has blown up, and you just want some sort of arbitration from a third party that's external, objective, yet still kind of knows the industry. The problem is, I see it, you go to through the legal system. There are so many things that aren't really legally binding in pageantry. We accept it as an industry, but it's hardly law. Like, for example, if you remove a title holder, normally the first runner-up goes in her place, but that's hardly a law, is it? Now, I don't think that necessarily, I don't think the rulings of this party should be binding unless you want them to be. Because, I own my own business. I have so for a long time. I'm not super keen on the idea of someone else being able to decide what I have to do. But, maybe, if people want to sign up to agree to the decisions, to abide by the decisions of this third party, great. But in terms of just having some sort of objective third party that can arbitrate in disputes and maybe do some investigations to hear both sides and then pass down some kind of ruling to say, okay, we think this is what should be done. And by we, I don't mean me. I mean a panel of qualified, as in qualified, not like with bachelor's degrees necessarily, but people who know the industry. And I want a broad spectrum from different areas of expertise. So maybe a director, obviously a contestant, maybe someone who's known pageantry for a long time, such as myself, or another pageant critic or pageant journalist, someone who knows law, for example. Putting together a diverse group of people who have expertise in pageantry and putting these sorts of contentious matters before them for some sort of at least external arbitration, rather than just director and contestant going at each other on social media and really spiteful direct messages. Because when emotions get high, it's hard to have any sort of productive discussion. So I think a third party that's objective yet still has pageantry expertise would be a good idea. Again, I'm not super crazy on the idea of its decisions being binding, because I don't think any director would probably want that, but at least some sort of body that can say, hey, given all the facts that we've been presented, this is what we think as a bunch of pageant people. I think that might be a good idea. And also having some very basic rules similar to the legal system in terms of, if someone on that panel or that third body knows the person in question, like let's say there's a dispute between a director and contestant, and let's say someone in this third party knows that director or knows that contestant, they should recuse themselves from any kind of judgment, which is what happens in the legal system, at least here in Australia. If you know the defendant or know the accused, you have to state that, and then you are removed from jury duty because you can't be trusted to be objective. But that's my third suggestion. Some sort of objective third party to help arbitrate pageant disputes. So again, open letter to you directors, and if you're a pageant contestant or just a pageant whatever, I'd love to hear your thoughts. But in terms of making sure that we build some sort of credibility in our industry, and making sure as best we can that this industry has some longevity and some sort of legitimacy, those are the three things I'd like to see, and I'd love to know your thoughts. Maybe you think I'm barking up the wrong tree, in which case I'd love to hear what you think, because as I said, this is an ongoing problem. I've been brought so many cases on a regular basis of something going wrong in pageantry, and very often I'm afraid to say it's with directors like this one who said, no, a Chinese girl can't represent, this girl can't represent New Zealand because she's not white enough. That shouldn't be happening, guys. We're in the 21st century now. So just to recap, number one, scoring transparency. Number two, giving the girls a chance to review the legal documentation, the contracts, and that should outline the exact expectations of the girl if she wins. And then third one, possibility of having some sort of third party objective ruling body like The Hague. I'm not saying anyone out there is war criminals, but some sort of external party that could probably arbitrate. I'm not a huge fan of a binding ruling, but just having some sort of arbitration, I think, could be a good idea, and would reassure, I think, a lot of the contestants that if something goes wrong, there is somewhere they can go other than, lawyer up, because most of us wouldn't want to do that. But that doesn't mean that the complaints or the problems that occur should just be ignored and buried, just because you don't want to take it through court. So I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think? Do you think this is an issue? That's been my experience. Maybe you don't think it's an issue at all. And then if you do think it's an issue, what do you think of my three suggestions? Is there anything you would add, subtract, edit, delete, etc.? So let me know your thoughts. Those are kookaburras.